to say a word to some of our more conservative friends out there who are thinking of voting for Trump. To say that above and beyond policy issues, where I personally have very, very strong disagreements with Trump, there is the issue of character. And I would ask people about what your political view is. Do you really want to explain to your kids or your grandchildren that you have a president who is a pathological liar? You want to explain how we have elected somebody who is a convicted felon, who is a convicted sexual abuser, and somebody, and this tells you all I think you need to know about Donald Trump. When he was a private businessman, his companies were involved in 4,000 different lawsuits. What does that tell you? How can you possibly be involved in 4,000 lawsuits? It tells you that you don't keep your word. You know, every businessman gets sued, you know, people get involved in lawsuits, but not 4,000 of them. And it just tells you that you have a person who lies all the time, signs contracts, ignores them. That is not somebody who should be president of the United States. But it's not just character. Women for decades have struggled to overcome second-class citizenship. You know? It took women fighting and sometimes dying to get the right to vote in the 1920s, 1920. And we know, I mean, in my lifetime, women did not be part of the building trades. The idea of a woman as a carpenter, my God, how crazy is a woman as a doctor? Just very, very rare. And I can remember not so many years ago, in the United States Senate, 100 people in the Senate, there were 2 women U.S. senators. And now in Minnesota, you have 2 U.S. senators. Think about the struggle of human rights and women's rights. It is, to say the least, absolutely unacceptable to deny the women of this country the fundamental right to control their own bodies. You know, we hear a lot of talk about freedom. Freedom. Everybody's for freedom. Well, if you can't control your own body, I don't know what freedom is. But it is not just women's rights that is at stake. Last week, I think it was, scientists told us that we had the hottest day on planet Earth that has ever been recorded. The hottest day. And I will tell you, with pain in my heart, in my own state, time after time after time, of being hit with floods, causing massive damage to homes, businesses, and our infrastructure. Just a few days ago, we had torrential rainfall, floods, and damage. And certainly it is not just Vermont. We're seeing drought. Turn on the TV, you're seeing forest fires out west. You recall that in Saudi Arabia a month ago, the temperature was 125 degrees, 1,000 people died. India, 127 degrees. And in Donald Trump, this is really quite incredible. Despite all of the scientific evidence, Donald Trump today believes that climate change is a hoax originating in China. Now, not only is this crazy, that's the least of it, but I want you to appreciate how terribly dangerous that is. Because understand this, Trump, who has the support of virtually the entire fossil fuel industry, if he is elected, and if we reverse everything that we have tried to do in recent years in terms of taking on and combating climate, the the word goes out to the entire world that if the largest economy in the world says that climate change is not real, what do you think the Chinese are going to say? What are they going to say in India and in Europe? The fight is over. The election of Donald Trump means the surrender to climate change and all of the horrific impacts that will have on our kids and future generations. Trump must not be elected. It is not just women's rights, and it is not just climate change. All of you will remember that having lost to Biden in 2020, Trump denied the election results, and in the process is undermining American democracy. You know, I have been in many elections in my state. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But what people almost always have done, you lose the election, you learn something from it. You congratulate the winner. There are rules. There are rules to a football game, a basketball game, and in elections. And when you lose, you have the guts to stand up in front of a TV camera and congratulate the winner. Not say, as Trump has even recently said, that the only way that he will accept the election results is if he thinks these elections are fair. That is not the way that politics and democracy is played. You don't write the rules as you go along, and you don't write the rules to favor yourself. In his last election effort, and I'll never forget this, he said, the only way I will lose this election is if there is fraud. Think about what that means. You can't lose the election, because if it's fraud, you really didn't lose the election. Too many people have fought and died in our country to preserve American democracy, and we're not going to let Trump destroy the foundations of what we have done. I think this is going to be a tough election for a lot of reasons, but I think that Kamala Harris stands an excellent chance to win, and I'll tell you why. Not only because of her abilities as a candidate, she is running on 3.5 years of a record which is the strongest record for a president in the modern history of this country. What she and President Biden have accomplished is something that all of us should be proud of. Yeah. For years, you have heard politicians get up there and say, we have got to do something about our roads and our bridges and our water systems and our wastewater plants. Our infrastructure is coming. That's what people said for decades. Well, you know what? We finally did it. We have put more money into rebuilding our infrastructure than any time in the history of this country. For years, you have heard people moaning and groaning about the deindustrialization of America. Well, I'm a former congressman and a senator who strongly oppose disastrous trade agreements which cost us millions of good-paying jobs. But what we are doing now, because of Biden and Harris, is beginning to rebuild our manufacturing base and create hundreds of thousands of new manufacturing jobs. And as chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, I can tell you that we're also now making more progress than ever before in combating the outrageous prices that we pay for prescription drugs in this country. We've got a long way to go. But the Biden-Harris administration is the first administration to have the guts to take on the power of the pharmaceutical industry. You know, in my view, when young people get a higher education, they should not have to go hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars into debt. And it's been my view for a while that we want to encourage young people to get the higher education that they need, not discourage them. And my own view was we should cancel all student debt in this country. We haven't done that yet, but Biden and Harris have canceled the debts of 5 million Americans. Don't swear. And while Donald Trump thinks that climate change is a hoax, President Biden and Vice President Harris strongly disagree. And that is why we have put more money into transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel into sustainable energy and energy efficiency than any time in American history. In my mind, the choice is really quite clear. That we have got to elect Kamala Harris and defeat Donald Trump. But I want to go on and say something else that is not talked about a whole lot. And that is, as somebody who comes from the working class, I grew up in a rent-controlled apartment. That's where I spent the first part of my life. I am sensitive to the struggles that working people are experiencing all over this country. And I have to tell you, and it makes me very sad and distressed, that in Congress and in the corporate media, we do a terrible job of discussing the reality of life for the 60% of our people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And that is, as you can understand, why is that? Why are members of Congress not prepared to talk about those issues? Why is corporate media not talk about those issues? I mean, issues, and the reason is fairly obvious. Corporations make very large campaign contributions, and you got 8 media conglomerates that control about 90% of what the American people see, hear, and read. So what I want to do is take a moment, I'm going to open it up for discussion. I want to talk about what's going on in the economy in a way that very few people are talking about. And I want you to be thinking about why it is that we don't talk about some of these issues. Let me just mention some of them. Right now in America, the economy is doing extraordinarily well for the people on top. Yeah. You are living in a moment in American history where the 1% have never, ever had it so good. Meanwhile, at the same time, as the wealth and income of billionaires is exploding, 60% of our people live paycheck to paycheck. You all know what that means, paycheck to paycheck? Some of you live in paycheck to paycheck? All right. So I want you to be thinking about how it happens that in the richest country in the history of the world, we have an economy where the 1% have never had it so good, and 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. Today in America, and nobody talks about this, 3 people on top, 3 multi-billionaires, own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 160 million people. You got that? 3 people, 160 million people. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we address that? Is that what America is supposed to be about? Doesn't sound to me like a democratic society. It sounds to me like an oligarchic society. Today in America, while these rich people are getting richer, we have 600,000 Americans. See, we've gotten used to it, but we got 600,000 Americans sleeping out on the streets, and you got tens of millions who are desperately looking for affordable housing, who are paying 40 or 50% of their income in housing. Today in America, while the CEOs of large corporations are now making 350 times what their workers make. Got that? Now there was always, it's always been the case. The boss makes more than the worker. Nothing new about that. When I was a kid, that ratio was 20 to 1, 30 to 1. It is now 350 to 1. And at the same time, and this is an astounding fact which nobody ever talks about, real inflation accounted for wages for working people today is lower than it was 50 years ago. Got that? All right. In other words, you want to know why people are angry, why they're furious. And the answer is they're working long hours, they're stressed out for a dozen different reasons, they're worried about the future of their kids, and real wages are going nowhere in a hurry. Unbelievable when you think about it. Think about all of the changes in technology, the increase in worker productivity. The worker today far more productive than the person 50 years ago doing roughly the same job. And yet people are making less money in inflation adjusted for income. Today in America, we have experienced a massive transfer of wealth. According to a corporation called the Rand Corporation, not exactly a socialist operation, they have estimated that over the last 50 years, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. Today in America, while insurance companies and drug companies make tens and tens of billions of dollars in profit, they pay their CEOs tens of millions of dollars a year, 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured, large deductibles and co-payments. And if you can believe it or not, 1 out of 4 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors prescribe. Today in America, and this is also an astounding fact that is not talked about very much, nationally, our life expectancy, how long we live as a people, is way down and way below most other industrialized countries. Countries like Japan, many of the European countries, their people live significantly longer lives than we do. And that's a problem. But what is an even more obscene reality is that if you are working class or lower income in America, you will live a life that is 10, 15 years shorter than the top 1%. Got that? In America today. While billionaires pay an effective tax rate that is less than what a truck driver or a nurse pays, 25% of senior citizens in America are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. I don't know how anybody, let alone a senior, can get by on $15,000 a year or less. Half the seniors are trying to get by on $30,000 a year or less. Today in America, above and beyond income and wealth inequality, there's another economic reality that is not talked about terribly much. And that is we have more concentration of ownership than in any time in the history of this country. What does that mean? The theory of America is that we are a country based on vigorous competition and small businesses. The reality is very different. In economic sector after sector, whether it's transportation, whether it's agriculture, whether it's financial services, whether it's media, you have a small number of huge multinational corporations who control what is produced and the prices that we pay for their products. So you want to talk about inflation, you could tie that directly to corporate greed and companies that are making record-breaking profits. I'll give you an example of what economic power is about. Today we have 3 Wall Street investment firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which together control $20 trillion in assets. $20 trillion controlled by 3 investment firms. And these 3 investment firms combined are the major stockholders in 95% of S&P corporations.
Wow.
Got that? Go to any company that you want, and then look out, just Google it, and find out who owns those companies. And that's what you'll find. Time and time again, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street will be one of the major stockholders. Think about what that power is about. They determine wages in America. They determine whether jobs stay in the United States or go to Mexico or China. That's incredible power, economic power. And then there's something else that's going on that we don't talk enough about. And it's just visible to anybody who has eyes to see it. And that right now, we are living in a nation not just with a rigged economy that is dominated by the greed of billionaires, but we are also living within a political system that is also dominated by these very same people. All right? I don't know about the papers, the newspapers here in the Midwest, but you go to these New York Times, article after article. Campaign donors say this. Campaign donors say that. Well, maybe it's time we paid attention to what the average American feels, not just campaign donors. And again, we have become almost immune to this reality. Some of you may have seen that Elon Musk, the wealthiest person in the world, is contributing $45 million a month to a Trump super PAC. And dozens of other billionaires are contributing to super PACs. And Democrats also have super PACs. If we are going to create a government that represents the needs of ordinary people, it is absolutely clear that we got to get rid of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And in my view, we have to move to public funding of elections. Those are some of the issues that are virtually not discussed as part of campaigns, but I want to touch on a few more. Our healthcare system. Let me ask you a question. Don't tell me what I want to hear. In your judgment, is our current healthcare system broken?
Yes.
Anybody disagree? Okay. Well, the owners of the insurance companies disagree. I think it's great. In fact, what you have right now is a healthcare system that is doing just great for insurance companies and drug companies. They're making money hand over fist. And yet for the average American, what we're looking at is, first of all, I don't know how many of you know this, because again, the media doesn't talk about it, we don't talk about it very much in Congress. How many of you know that we are spending twice as much per capita on healthcare as the people of any other nation? You know that? Yep. So you would think, if I bought a car for $70,000, you bought a car for $35,000, you'd say, wow, Bernie, you got a great car, it's twice as good as my car, it does all kinds of things. We're spending twice as much as any other country, and our outcomes are actually worse. We have 85 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured. You'll know what underinsured means? What it means is that technically you have health insurance. In reality, you have some large deductible, which makes you hesitate to go to the doctor because you're going to have to pay out of your own pocket. All right, talk about deductibles. What kind of deductibles do people here have?
$12,500.
How much?
$12,500.
Sure. You know what she's saying? She's saying that unless she spends, she has insurance, but unless she spends $12,500 out of her own pocket,
As a family.
your insurance doesn't kick in. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. What other deductibles do we have?
10,000.
How much? 9,000?
10K.
10K. All right. So you have health insurance, but it doesn't mean anything. I mean, unless you get hit by a truck or something. All right. I'll tell you another fact. Is we recently did a hearing on this. Today in America, about half of people who have cancer and undergo treatment end up going bankrupt or depleting all of their financial resources. Take a step back and take a breath and think about it. Somebody comes down with a terrible illness. They're fighting for their lives. It's enough to worry about how you get well without having to worry that your family's finances are going to be destroyed. That is cruel. That is unacceptable. And the bottom line, to my view, is that the function of this healthcare system is to make as much money as possible for insurance companies and drug companies. Our job is to create a healthcare system that understands that healthcare is a human right. And I want you to think for a minute. This is not, very often, people like me are considered to be far left. Oh my God, healthcare is a human right. That's far left ideology. Asking the billionaires to pay their fair share of taxes, far left. And understand that that is what the establishment does to try to marginalize us. It is not far left. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people. I was just talking a couple of weeks ago to a friend of mine whose father lives in Canada and had some heart surgery. And what he said is that the biggest bill he had when he came out of heart surgery in the hospital was his parking fees in the parking lot. Because what they do and what other countries do is you publicly fund healthcare. They are spending in Canada 1/2 of what we spend. There are no out-of-pocket expenses. You don't have to take your wallet out. You sign your name. And they spend, once again, half per capita of what we spend. And by the way, they live longer lives than we do. Now, what I think we have got to be doing is fighting for a bunch of very specific ideas right now to put them into the mix, to make sure that our ideas are not, to understand they're not radical ideas. Let's put them in the mix. Let me give you examples of what I'm talking about. I've introduced legislation, not radical legislation. It says that right now you've got a lot of elderly people in this country who cannot afford to go to a dentist, they cannot afford hearing aids, they can't afford eyeglasses. What about expanding Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and vision? And how about paying for that by lowering prescription drug costs in America that Medicare pays for? I mentioned a moment ago about how half of our elderly people trying to get by on $30,000 or less. How about expanding Social Security benefits by lifting the cap on taxable income? Right now, as many of you know, we have a totally regressive funding mechanism for Social Security. So if one person makes $16 million a year and one person makes about $160,000 a year, they both pay the same amount into Social Security because we've got a cap on taxable income. You lift that cap, we can expand benefits by $2,400 a year and extend the solvency of Social Security for 75 years. President Biden was talking about something that I'm excited about. We're working on this issue. And that is, as I mentioned, when you have so many of our people struggling with cancer and running up huge medical bills, let's eliminate all medical debt in America. And I'm embarrassed to tell you what many of you know to be true, is that at the federal level, the minimum wage is all of $7.25 an hour. And if you can find anybody in America who can live on $7.25 an hour, I'd like to say hello to that person. Because they don't exist. All right? A few years ago, I brought forth legislation, didn't go as far as I would want, to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. We got all of no Republican support. We lost 8 Democrats, we got only 42 votes. Our job together is to demand that the U.S. Congress raises the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. And our brothers and sisters here in the trade union movement know that all over this country, there are a lot of people who want to join unions, but they are unable to do so because of illegal corporate interference. So what happens is somebody is trying to organize a union and somebody says, well, you were late. The boss says, you were late 3 years ago. You're fired. Or we're going to take workers and put them in a back room and tell them how terrible unions are. Or we're going to tell them that if you form a union, guess what? This company's moving to China. That exists. Companies are now spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year trying to prevent workers from joining unions. And that is why we must pass what is called the PRO Act, which will punish companies that act illegally to deny workers the right to work. And I want to give you an example of something. If anyone wants to ask me a question about it, happy to answer it, but I don't want to go into great length now. But as the former chairman of the Budget Committee, I was involved in the passage of the American Rescue Plan early on in the Biden years. And what that did was a $1.9 trillion bill, which really acted, I think, in a very strong and effective way at a time when our economy was in the worst shape since the Great Depression, because people weren't going to work because of COVID. And our hospitals were being overloaded with people who were coming in because of COVID. 3,000 people a day were dying. And what we did is we passed a $1.9 trillion bill, which, among other things, put $1,400 into all of your pockets for every person in this country. And that went a long way to helping people who were scared to death of what was going on in that moment. But there's something else that we did in that. Just give you an example what progressive legislation could do. What we said is, look, the American people are not going to work, got to extend unemployment, raise the benefits, got to provide $1,400 for every man, woman, and child, got to do that. But something else, parents are scared to death, having a hard time raising their kids. In my neighborhood, I live in a middle-class neighborhood in Burlington, never forget this. Hundreds of cars were lining up to get emergency food distributed by the Vermont National. People online, never in a million years would have thought they'd have to ask for emergency food. They didn't have the food to feed their kids. And what we did in that bill, one provision, we said we're going to provide a $300 refundable tax credit for every kid that you have for working class families. You know what that one provision did? That one provision lowered the child poverty rate in this country by over 40%. One provision. That's what we can do. In America today, I know in Vermont, I don't know that much about the situation in Minnesota, but I can tell you we have a major housing crisis. People can't afford rents. Young people can't afford to buy a house. We got to do at least two things: build millions of units of low-income and affordable and senior housing. And at a time when Wall Street is buying more and more housing units in this country, President Biden made this point: we're going to put a cap on the rate increases that they can give. And at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, you know what else we've got to do? We've got to demand that the billionaire class start paying its fair share. So let me just conclude, and we'll open up the discussion by saying this. The immediate task in the next 3 months is to do everything that we can to elect Kamala Harris as our next president. But brothers and sisters, we have also got to understand that the struggle will continue the day after that election.
Oh, yeah.
Working class people are the majority of people in this country. And their voices and their needs are not only not being addressed, they're not even being discussed. Right? So we have got to put those issues on the table, and we've got to come up with solutions. But we are demanding, don't let anybody tell you these are radical ideas. They are not. Building affordable housing ain't a radical idea. Not having a child in poverty or people sleeping out on the street is not a radical idea. Demanding that billionaires stop paying their fair share of taxes is not a radical idea. Healthcare for all exists in virtually every major country on earth. Not a radical idea. So don't let anyone marginalize you. Don't let anyone tell you you're an extremist. What we are fighting for is a nation of economic justice, of social justice, of racial justice. There is no reason on earth that we cannot achieve it, except for one fact. The people on top, and I deal with these guys every day, they are not nice people. In fact, not only are they not nice, they suffer from a very serious addiction problem. And their addiction is not necessarily alcohol or drugs or tobacco. Their addiction is greed.
Yeah.
And unless we get a handle on that greed, I don't know what kind of future our country will have. They want it all. I mean, they want it all. They want to pay lower taxes. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare. They want more tax breaks. The fossil fuel industry wants fewer regulations so they can destroy the planet. On it goes. So brothers and sisters, the next 3 months, we elect Kamala Harris, and the day after, we continue to build the movement with the trade unions and everybody else to create a government that works for all of us and not just the few. Thanks very much.